All right, we're going to get started here because meetings are being recorded, so if people miss the first couple minutes, that's all right. Well, to everyone that was here last week, or last month, I should say, welcome again to Drupal Pupils. And then for people that are new, welcome to the show. So I want to introduce Jared. Jared Seats is my co-host. He does a lot of stuff in the background and really helped out with putting this together. So I'll let Jared kind of introduce Drupal Pupils. Say that 5 times fast. And then, put together a little intro video, which is kind of cool. So I'll let Jared take it away.
Yes, my name's Jared Seitz. I work for Acro Commerce. We just switched our name after 25 years from Acro Media to Acro Commerce. That's one that you can't say too fast either, I think. Patrick approached me just before the first Drupal Pupils, before it was even named Drupal Pupils. And I love the concept. I had just done a webinar with the Drupal Association, and it was a great experience, but I got off of it thinking, I don't know if I could do that and like run a webinar and keep it professional. And Patrick says, hey, we got this idea to just meet up and we're going to keep it casual and just talk about Drupal. And I love that idea. And I think I got to go to DrupalCon for the first time this past spring. And I just love the atmosphere and just how anyone could go and ask a question, or it had that vibe to it. And when Patrick was talking about this meetup, I felt that's what it had. It had more of that fireside chat feel. Even this morning I was thinking, or it was last night, my middle daughter, Gemma, she's like, I'm so excited it's November. I'm like, why? It's like summer's over. It's not nice out. And she's like, it's like Christmas vibes now. She's like, I love it. So that's what we're going for with Drupal Pupils. Opposed to a university lecture, it's more like after school beers with the teacher. It's more like a field trip. So to officially kick us off, I did create a little intro video. I was going to wrap it myself, and then I realized that Drupal Pupils is a lot to say. So I'll just show it to you guys. 1 second here.
Drupal Pupils. Who can teach you how to Drupal? You know why? Because everybody loves it. All we need is some code that's super bumpin', and for you to back it up and dump it. Teach me how to Drupal. Teach me how to Drupal. All my modules updated. All my modules updated. Teach me how to Drupal. Teach me how to Drupal. All my modules updated. All my modules updated.
If you guys think of any other lyrics, let us know, and we'll be happy to add them in.
Do you want me to send you the link to ChatGPT?
Yeah, that could work. Full disclosure, this whole group is about transparency. I did rip those little water icons off of like a baby Einstein video, and then I sped them up and then reversed it.
Why Jared is so helpful to the show, because I would not have been able to do that. So, but yeah, welcome everyone to Drupal Pupils after the great introduction. So introducing our guest today, Alex Pott. I will share the PowerPoint here real quick. I'll go back here. All right. Share screen. There we go. All right. All right. Can everyone see it?
Yes.
All right. Cool. All right. So, Alex, before we get into yourself, are you ready to play a little game?
Yeah, let's play a game.
All right. Let's do it. All right. This is what we call the Drupal dilemma. You're going to MacGruber this a little bit. And this is something we always like to start off with on the show as a little game. So, the mysterious full of crepe debacle. It's a great name for a restaurant. Background: full of crepe is a multinational restaurant corporation facing baffling Drupal issues demanding an expert's touch. So the problem, Alex, that you're going to have to solve here: sluggish performance, page load times degrade despite resource upgrades. I will let you go ahead and explain how you would solve that problem.
Sure. So, so the first step to any web performance issue is to, at least in my experience, is to find out whether you're dealing with a back-end performance issue or a front-end performance issue. And your browsers make this easier to determine where it is, because you can load the page and go to your developer tools and have a look at, what's slow. And so the first thing to work out is, well, do I need to be looking at the back end code or the front end code? And what will tell you that is the time to first byte. So if, say, your page is taking 2 seconds to load and your time to first byte from the server is 1.5 seconds, then the majority of your problem is on the speed of your server. If it's the other way around, if it's like 100 milliseconds from your server and the rest of the time in terms of before the page is loaded, before the user can see it and interact with it, like the largest content paint, for example, if that's taking 1.9 seconds, then you've got a front-end performance problem. Now, disclaimer, I'm not very good with front-end performance problems beyond like the kind of basics of it, looking for what's the largest content paint when the page becomes interactive, looking at what's required to be loaded before the page can actually show anything. So there's the obvious stuff like JavaScript in your head, JavaScript in the footer, moving down. Google has some, I think it's called Lightspeed, helps you identify that kind of stuff. So yeah, follow what they say or get your front enders on it, because it's not my wheelhouse. But if the problem is time to first byte, then we're dealing with something in the back end, which is something that I have got quite a bit of experience dealing with. So the first thing I'd be asking myself is, should this page be cached or not? It's a kind of elementary Drupal question. It's like, am I expecting this to come from the page cache? And if it's not, then the question is, why not? Because it should be far. I mean, if it's slow and it's coming from page cache, then you have a problem with your database server probably, or wherever the page cache is being taken from. But that's highly unlikely. The most likely thing is that you're not having the thing's not being cached, and there can be a number of reasons for that. The typical ones will be that there's some block on the page which says that the whole page is not cacheable, and so you can approach this through a few different ways of trying to work that out. One is just to simply enable and disable blocks and see what happens to the performance. That's the kind of easy one without actually having to do much work. The other way of working that out would be to start to use tools like XHProf or Blackfire. Both of those tools will show you what code is taking time. So if you are able to get a profile for your request from your server, you can then have a look and go, okay, well, that block is taking the most, that part of the page is taking these functions, and you can work up the call stack. So the whole loop is taking 1.5 seconds. Well, maybe like there's 1 second that's spent on this particular block, and then from that block you'll see that it's probably loading a view. The view is uncached, and it's doing some horrible SQL queries. And so then the question is how can you turn that into something that's cacheable? And that just becomes the developer's job. And there are a few different techniques for that. But obviously the quick fix is to disable whichever part of the page. And that will give you the time in order to kind of work through why it's slow. There are some other tools that you can use for like looking at back-end performance that are quite easy to use. In the Devel module, there's something called the Web Profiler module. It's part of Devel. You can enable that, and that will give you a toolbar on your page, which will show you some useful stats about like the number of queries that are hitting the database and the time that it's taking on the server, the amount of memory it's using, and stuff like that. So that can be used to have some insight into what's going on. And then kind of going further down the stack, it can be useful to look at things like slow query logs from your SQL server, where so not just often if a site's slow, it's not just going to be the response that's slow. There's going to be other things that are slow, like your cron jobs and things that are doing important back-end processing might also be slow. So having a look in your slow query log can sometimes reveal like, hey, we've got this job that's supposed to be looking at commerce orders and firing off something into a queue on a different service. Oh, that's going really slow because there's missing indexes and stuff like that. So yeah, that's what I'd be looking at. Does anyone have some good suggestions on the front end where I'm not an expert, or things that you think that I missed? Because there's always more to learn, and I'm as keen to learn from you as hopefully you're as keen to learn from me, or whatever, whichever way that goes.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, if anyone else in the group wants to chime in.
Sure. Yeah, we run Lighthouse reports all the time, and we find, besides JavaScript, the biggest issue is image sizes. With WebP now in Drupal core, it's silly not to use that in all of your image styles. So just simply adding that into all of your image styles or responsive image styles does give a huge bump in Lighthouse scores. And then having appropriately sized responsive images helps a ton also.
Yeah, there was also something that landed recently in core to do with image field formatters and the ability to set the loading strategy between eager and lazy, which is I think that work was actually sponsored by Google, because they were this is one of the most easy ways that Drupal could improve the web. And so eager means that it's going to try to load it in at the time that the browser parses the image tag. Lazy means that it's not an image that's particularly important to load, so that it will load it up lazy after the page is displayed. Yeah, and that's configurable on image fields now.
Cool. Yeah, I also like Critical CSS a ton. So Critical is an NPM library by Yadi Osman, who also does all the Google performance stuff, which it's an NPM package that uses headless Chrome to render the page, takes a snapshot of all the CSS you need for what is initially rendered on a page, and saves it as a file. And then there's a Drupal module called Critical CSS that allows you to set parameters, so you could pull this CSS in on every type of bundle. So like, your article content type, your page content type, or even a path or a node. So it inlines the CSS in your head like it's 1997. And then it defers all the rest of your CSS from Drupal and loads it in the footer using JavaScript. So what you get is a super fast page loaded, all the CSS that's above the fold, and then after the page loads, then the rest of your massive CSS from Drupal gets loaded asynchronously. So we get big boosts in performance when we do that too. Just requires a little bit of configuration in your front end ops in your local development environment, and a little strategy about your content types and how you're going to load it and where you're going to load it, that kind of thing.
Got it. So, I mean, then it's like managing how big files are that are loading, and if can make things loading at the same time, it'll just slow things down essentially.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyone else have anything to add to that?
I was just thinking after each segment, we should ask Jacob, hey, what do you think of that answer? And then Jacob can say, oh, I thought it was all right, but his profile picture will pop up and we'll get, the 2 thumbs up.
That's awesome. Oh my God. There you go.
It could be an ongoing gag if you keep joining.
Okay, I like it. I like it. Yep. Awesome. Well, Alex, are you ready to get into yourself? We're gonna, get into your background in Drupal, and yeah, exciting.
Sure.
So you ready? All right, cool. All right, Alex, I'll let you take these points away, man. I will I'll ask some backup questions, but go ahead with your first computer. Tell us about that and kind of your experience in Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So showing my age a little bit here. I'm certainly not young, but then who is in the Drupal community anymore? Yeah, my first computer was a TRS-80 back in 1983 or something like that. I don't know. I was living in America at the time. My dad was in the Navy, and he was stationed in Charleston, South Carolina, and he came home with this computer from Radio Shack, I think he bought it from. I don't know. But yeah, it was immediately pretty addictive. Like, they had this Double Back was this funny game where you had to like draw circles around pieces of fruit, and Dungeons of Dagorth was a really, really early kind of 3D going through a dungeon where there's some serpents attacked you and stuff. And yeah, I think from that kind of moment on, I was intrigued by these things called computers. I think like many children, you kind of get a computer and you're like, this is just amazing. And I certainly reacted that way to it. One thing that was really cool is I got to see a TRS-80 in a room, much like the room I had in America. There's a museum in Seattle of a kind of like history of computing. I think it's like set up by one of the Microsoft people, the one that's not Bill Gates, the other guy. And yeah, they actually had a room with the TRS-80, and it actually had like Dungeons of Dagorth, and I got to play it again. It was like, oh my gosh, this is like going back in time. And then kind of probably like many of us kind of regretted all those computers that have gone by the wayside, and that I haven't had a space in my life to have a kind of like computer archive room with all the different things that I've used and had over my life. Because yeah, now I just have kind of one laptop and that's it. Although yeah. I have children now, and my child, one of my oldest son, really wants a gaming PC, and so he's like, oh, can I buy one? And I'm like, yeah, you can, but we're gonna have to buy all the bits, and I'm gonna put it together for you. So that's gonna be exciting to build a PC again, the first time in like 20 years. Yeah, and then so after that, I returned to the UK when my dad moved back, and at school we had this amazing program from the national broadcaster here called the BBC, where they kind of they built a computer, or they got someone to make a computer called the BBC Micro, and they put it in loads of schools, and it was a really good early computer. It's kind of interesting how that must have influenced like the world of computing, because there's so many people who learned to like write programs on it, but there's also the fact that out of it grew the Acon Archimedes, which then was like one of the first ever RISC computers, and from that ARM was born, and every single one of us is sitting with a device in our pocket inspired by like ARM chips. So it's I kind of wished I'd taken it apart more. I did take the BBC Micro apart several times, but I didn't take it apart to the level of actually understanding chip design. Kind of after getting into my first bits of programming and stuff, I kind of had a relationship with computers that I think many people go through, where you kind of, your parents are telling you you're gaming too much and you're only doing gaming, and you kind of have this guilt relationship with them. And I was always kind of scientific, so I actually studied chemistry at university, and avoided computers until the end of university, where I needed a job because my life circumstances, well, life changed a bit. My dad died, and I didn't want to be like a financial burden at all on my mother. I wanted to be able to have a job quickly. And one of the things that happens in the UK is like companies come around universities and say, hey, we want to employ smart people to write code. And I hadn't been doing much code at that point. And I was like, well, I can do that. And sure enough, I was picked up by a large systems integration company called, at the time, SEMA, and they wanted me to make mobile telephone billing systems. So I was programming in COBOL and some Pascal, like some of the switches. No, it wasn't Pascal, it was Fortran. Some of the switches had stuff written in Fortran, which was like your network switches for mobile phones. So it was all pretty interesting. Worked for them for a while, and then I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life? I'm writing code to sell air, because that's basically what mobile phones are providing people, like airtime. This doesn't really make any sense. I want to do something a bit more significant. So I applied for some jobs at universities and stuff in communications departments and consultancy kind of stuff. And I got a job at a university called Imperial College, which is one of the leading science universities in the UK, and they had a small consultancy firm that kind of sold their professors' times out to people, and they participated in EU projects, and they were like, build a website for an EU project, and I was like, well, what shall I use to build? So I looked at all the open source solutions, and back in, I think it was 2007-8 time, I discovered this thing called Drupal, and I was like, this is amazing. There's all this stuff here. I can integrate it with document management systems, and it all just works. It's all for free, and I can get some server space and just upload it, and it will work. And it does like 90% of what I wanted to do. And then there was the 10% that it didn't do. So I started to lurk around in the modules and go, okay, I want this module to do that. I'll change it to do that. I think I bought like the classic Drupal book, Developing Pro Drupal Development by John Van Wyck or something like that. I can't remember it. So there's a classic old book. That's the book that a lot of people who got into Drupal have. And yeah, I realized that there was this thing called IRC where people talked about Drupal all the time. So I started to lurk in there and watch people, and everyone was getting excited about DrupalCon in Paris because it was the one after the legendary DrupalCon 2008 in Szeged where they drank out of town, and everyone was pretty excited by that. So like, let's go to Paris. And I was like, oh, that sounds fun. So I went to Paris. I met Dries in the toilet, which was exciting. I went to a code sprint for my first time, and I did the thing that nearly every first time sprinter does is I came with a computer that wasn't set up to do any coding on. I spent the whole time setting up my environment and then left having done nothing. I spent my day sitting next to someone called Karen S. Her full name is Karen Stevenson. She still works for Lullabot. She did a lot of the original work on the field system, everything, absolute Drupal legend. She's amazing. But I was just useless trying to help her do stuff on Drupal. I think it was Drupal 6 or Drupal, I can't remember. Is it Drupal 6 or Drupal 7? I have too many Drupal versions now. And yeah, so then I became like a contributor to Drupal after that. I started to try and regularly contribute, and especially when I went to a con, I'd always work on a few patches and stuff. But then, because I started doing more Drupal, I got approached by a really large company called Capgemini, who was building out the Royal Mail website on Drupal, and and they were like, "We need a project lead. Do you want to come do that?" And I was like, "Sure." That sounds fascinating. Did that. Got absolutely hammered by trying to have 150 people work on features all together at the same time. Features, the old Drupal 7 module. So we're trying to merge like the feature files together, trying to control like all the change configuration. Was like, this is impossible. So I was really intrigued by the configuration management initiative in Drupal 8. The initiative lead was someone called Hey Rocker. Now works for Lullabot, didn't at the time. And yeah, because I'd been lurking in the community for quite a while, I'd been contributing around sprints and stuff. I had a good idea about how to get involved. And I also knew that if I sat down on the table and told him everything was wrong, that he would just go, no, you've got to contribute, positively. It's much easier to sit down on a table and say to someone, hey, what can I do? So I think it was DrupalCon Chicago. I sat down next to him on the CMI table. Often at sprints, there's like tables for specific initiatives. Sat down and said, hey, what can I do? And he was like, oh, I've got these issues. And I started working on them. And before long, because I worked on so many of them, he was like, hey, do you want to like have a bit more of a role in this initiative? And yeah, one thing led to another, and I became one of the leads of the CMI initiative in Drupal 8. So if you've ever had trouble importing and exporting config, you can blame me. And then through doing that, how do we put it? I spent a lot of time on Drupal core, and it became noticed. And the amount of work that people were trying to achieve in Drupal 8 meant that the Dries and the committer team, such as it was at that point, it was quite small, realized they needed more resource. And so Dries heard through the grapevine that I'd quit my job because I wanted to do something different. And he was like, hey, do you want to be a committer? And I was like, yeah, why not? And so yeah, that happened in 2013, and since then I've been maintaining Drupal core and leading on several different kind of config initiatives. During that time, since 2013, I've had 2 sabbaticals because they're good too. So yeah, take time off because otherwise you burn out.
Alex, I have to ask real quick. You said, you know, when you first came across Drupal, it did about 90% of what you wanted to do. So I have to ask, is the 10%, like, does it now do the other 10%? I know it's ever changing, but I have to ask, are you like at that point where like it does all I wanted to do?
I think my needs back then were very different to my needs now. Because, you know, there I was trying to build a site for a large group of scientists to both kind of manage all their shared documents on their private documents, but also communicate to the world about what their program was doing. And the bits I were looking, the 10% that it didn't do for me was around kind of managing groups and stuff. And I think like the group module goes some way towards that. And there was the organic groups module at the time, but I might not have known about them because, you know, it's always that 10%, it probably had someone who had a module out there for it, but it doesn't mean that I knew about it. I mean, module discovery is still a problem, right? It's one that the project browser initiative is trying to solve. Like, where is the module for that? So yeah,
that makes sense. I'm glad you brought up the features thing in Drupal 7. I think, and Jim is gonna obviously touch on the recipes part along with you. But I think kind of from what I understand, Drupal, the recipes initiative kind of picks up where that left off, which I'm glad you brought up. But yeah, get into your most recent sabbatical real quick. Give us a little brief snippet of kind of what you did with the family and all that.
We spent a lot of time in tents, trying to keep cool during Europe's various heat waves of the summer. I had about 3.5 weeks just traveling with my daughter whilst my son was at school. My wife and I swapped over for some of the time, so we both had some solo times with each of the kids, and we learned that we're much better parents with 1 kid than we are with 2 kids.
That makes sense.
But yeah, we spent time in the Mediterranean, so Sicily, a little bit of Italy, Croatia, Montenegro, Slovenia, all great countries. If you like the outdoors and mountains and the sun, we would recommend heartily Slovenia. It's an amazing place. It's beautiful.
Yeah, you camped the whole time or part of the time?
Most of the time. It's the only way I can afford to spend so much time off is in a hotel or Airbnb or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah, man, haven't gone to Europe yet, but that is on the bucket list. So cool. Awesome. All right, well, we'll move into kind of something you're doing right now, 10.2. So we're moving to that, and you can tell us about what's going on with 10.2.
Sure.
All right. And then if you need me to share, I know you mentioned you wanted to maybe share some of these, so we can always go off of the point, and then you can share this as well. So, but yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I guess what I'm going to do here is just take you through some of the things, the highlights that I have that are coming in Drupal 10.20, which will be released in December this year. You know, what's good from both the kind of site builder perspective and what's good from the kind of back-end developer perspective. So yeah, I think the easiest way to talk about these things is to show you most of them. So I'm going to endeavor to share my screen and see how that goes. If something's too small, and I will share. Yeah. We'll go Inception for a bit. Right. If there's something you see and that you want to know more about how that works, just tell me. And if something's too small, then also let me know. So all I have here is a checked out Drupal 10.2x, which is like the development branch, and I've just required Drush to do some things a little bit quick. I use Fishshell, which like has abbreviations for things, so I can just type something small and it will do a load of stuff, or give me the command to do a load of stuff. The reason I like it is because it expands so that people who don't know how things work can actually see the commands. So this is going to run like a Drush site install for
Alex, real
anymore.
quick, Jared has a question.
Oh
Right.
yeah, I don't have a real question yet, but if you can make it a little bigger,
Oh.
Oh
I
yeah.
think let's go max size.
That's good.
Awesome. Thanks,
Oh yeah. Now it's good. Yeah. Please interject with sorry. Just say so. Yeah. So this is going to install standard and just set up some stuff. You can see my local database password. Not that it's very interesting. So yeah, this is installing Drupal standard, and I'm just going to show you the nice improvements to it. Let's go there. Right. So probably will need to zoom in here. Let's make this bigger. All right. So what do I mean by the field UI improvements? So we all know and love the field UI. I can't log in because I misspelled admin. There's been a number of improvements to 10.2. The field UI is, see, I'm nervous, navigation around this thing. Content types. The field UI is in here in the manage fields. So one of the main things that's changed is how you create fields. It's now much nicer. Here you get an actual list of and icons of what you're going to create. It's very easy to see. It's not a drop-down list where you don't know what's in there. So you can assign a label. Let's create a list or something. I'll show you another good improvement. If we can go to selection list. So immediately when you select that, it gives you some of the other options that you used to have to select from the drop-down. Really easy to see what this is. This text gives you some examples. So much easier to start with. And then you get into a single form for both the field, what's known as the field storage and the field instance. In Drupal, fields are on the entity level, and then the field storage is on the entity level, and the field instance is on the bundle level. So in this instance, the entity is a node and the bundle is an article. And it allows you to set up these things here. So this is the list field. There are some allowed values there. And you can set some other things that the instance, like the number of values. And another big improvement here in list fields is that if you want to enter in allowed values like that, what you'd have to do before is click on add another item, but now you can just hit return and it will automatically start adding ones. Which is really nice, makes it much easier. And then you say settings. And so what you can, if you could compare that to the old one, it would just, it's much easier to see what's going on than here on this equivalent page in 10.1. What you would see is a label and then a drop down with all of this stuff, every single thing, and all the different options under here all jammed into it. So it's much easier to know what you're creating. And obviously, creating fields is like one of the most important parts of Drupal. The content model is what Drupal is good at. Is what sets it out from something like WordPress. Is there anything else from the field I'd like to show you? And another thing that's really nice is that the kind of adding and reusing is split up. So here you know when you're creating a new field or reusing an existing field, and then if you click reuse an existing, you get a nice list of just the ones to reuse. Rather than, again, this is separating up the journeys of reusing, adding this field that I just added to the article. I can add it to the basic page easily by just clicking reuse. It takes me into the page for configuring the field, and then you can press save. As I think you can see there's actually a bug there because it didn't save all the things, so I have to work out why that is. We just found a bug worth showing people. That's cool. I wonder why that didn't work. Interesting. Maybe it's because I did it on that first one here. I will raise a bug report later. Nice. So does anyone have any questions about the field UI improvements?
Yeah, so we can we'll kind of handle all questions at the end. Yeah, I guess we still have plenty of time, but yeah, for sake of time, we can move on to PHP attributes.
Sure. So PHP attributes. So in PHP 8, I think it was, they introduced a new language feature of attributes, which map to annotations quite nicely. And we've been discussing how are we going to move from annotations, which is something provided by a dependency of Drupal, the Doctrine project, to attributes which are built into PHP. And we've finally got that on the way, and we've started to convert block plugins to use them. So I can show you here. Ooh, make this bigger. Nice and big for everyone. Let's have a look at this code in 10.1. So in 10.1, here's the attribute. It's part of a comment. Some people from the Drupal community, this was one of the things that made them really hate Drupal 8, was the fact that there was kind of code in the comment. But finally, now in Drupal 10.2, we're moving to attributes for these things. And so it moves out of the class comment, and it becomes this thing, which is a language feature. And the really neat thing about this being a language feature is it means that it is actually PHP. So where before this translatable thing was using a special @translation markup annotation, now it can actually just use the same thing as you use in code. You can use the same translatable markup object, and that will mark it as translatable, and the locale module will know how to translate that. But also you get code completion on this stuff. So if I remove all that stuff, start to type in, it knows that there's an ID field. It would be able to tell me that it's a string if I'd let it go. Admin label, you see it comes in, it tells me all this stuff here. So it's much easier to discover what's in the attribute than it was when it was an annotation. Really, really nice feature for developers.
Very cool. Very cool. Nice. Let's move on to controllers. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, we'll take a question on this one. Yeah.
Does that mean in Drupal 11 everything's going to fail that doesn't convert over to this from the PHP comments?
We haven't yet decided when to deprecate annotations. It's likely to be how much support we need to do to make annotations work in the versions of PHP that that Drupal 11 will support. Because so one of the things with the Doctrines annotations dependency is that we've actually had to fork it in order to support it on the latest versions of PHP 8. So we're now maintaining parts of the library as a fork actually in part, of course. So that's expensive to us. We'd much rather use language features than have to maintain this code. But if we do it, we will issue deprecations. So if you do have an annotation in your code, if you have deprecation testing, then it will tell you. But also, we're pretty sure that it will be possible to write a rector rule. So rector is a PHP package that allows you to provide code transforms, where you can take like old code and upgrade it to new code by just running a program. And for Drupal 9 to 10, there were some rector rules written by Matt Clayman, and I envisage that if we do this, if we do deprecate and remove attributes from Drupal 11, we will actually do some work on making sure that there are rector rules in order to upgrade people's annotations to attributes, because it's something that can be programmed.
Cool.
Cool.
All right, Alex, go ahead and take us through controllers.
Okay, another really neat thing. We will, again, I'll swap back to 10.1 so we can see the code. This one, controllers, well, it's really about kind of auto wiring. Drupal man's auto wiring. So one of the things, if you write a controller, which is typically something that responds to a route, you often see stuff like this in the beginning. So you see a constructor which takes a load of stuff, And then you have a create method, which takes a container and passes a load of stuff in. And then you have some properties. In Drupal 10.2, this has changed to just remove the crate. The crate has magically gone. And what's happening in the background is that the controller base class is able to determine what services to inject based upon what interfaces are required here. So in your core services file, you can see here we have like an alias for that, and it's able to map that to the date formatter, and it will pass the date formatter in to this for you. And if you really want to get into really nice new PHP, and you've got PHP 8.1 on your servers, and you are coding custom code, you can remove all of this. You can remove all of this and use a wonderful PHP 8 feature called property promotion, and just do change these to actually as they are. And all of that boilerplate has now gone. And yeah, it just works much nicer. So I really like that feature, and we are beginning to like roll out auto wiring to other parts of the system, and in fact you can already use auto wiring in your services files. So I don't know where I show you that. Yeah. So if you this service here has auto wire set to true, and so it means that it can get its dependencies. It will the container will know how to inject stuff into there just by the interfaces. So if you set auto wire to true on a service, it will just, you don't have to list all the arguments like you do for a normal one, like all this stuff. It just knows, which is quite cool. And you can use service defaults to set it to true for all of the services in your services.yaml, and then you have a much leaner services.yaml, and when you make a change to a constructor, you don't need to come and make a change to your services.yaml. It's kind of cool. So that's auto wiring.
Well, and then the next one was generic module test base.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've noticed is that a lot of modules in Contrib and custom don't have any tests, and we've got some generic tests that we would like to run on all modules. So we've implemented a class called generic module test space, and this just, if you extend this in your Contrib module or in your in custom module, and it's literally just doing that, you get some tests on your module for free. It will test whether your module can be installed, whether it can be uninstalled, or whether it can be reinstalled after it's been uninstalled, which a surprising number of modules can't be. It will test whether or not your configuration is valid in your install directory or your optional directory, whether it complies with the schemas, if you've got schemas, or if you're supplying config that's from another module, if they have schemas, whether it complies with that. It also makes some assertions around whether or not you've got hook help and things like that. So it's a really good way of just getting some very basic, quick, kind of happy path test coverage for your modules in Contrib or in custom.
Nice. Anyone have any questions on that? All right, now we're good. On to GitLab CI.
Okay, so for a long time, Drupal.org has been rolling its own CI. That was when I first started working on Drupal. I think it was a guy called Bumba Tower, who I think then went to work for Google, but he devised this whole massive system called QA, Drupal QA, and it was integrated with the project module, and there was loads of components that were all being maintained by him, and following his work, the Drupal Association. Then back at the beginning of Drupal 8, the Drupal Association rewrote a lot of that to become a kind of pluginized system that still had all the CI in-house, and they were maintaining that. But in the last couple of years, they've been working on migrating everything to GitLab, which is, I'm sure most of you know, it's an open source code hosting managing tool that also comes with its own CI. And in the last couple of months, we've got to the point now where GitLab CI is both usable for core development and also for your module development. So just starting with core, if you're working on a core issue, I'll just find an issue. Should have had one up. Let's go to one that's still open. It's really, really important not to post patches. Don't post patches. If you see here this bit, these issue forks, create an issue fork, because then it will run the tests on GitLab CI. And as you can see here, this whole lot took 9 minutes and 21 seconds. Under the old infrastructure, that would have taken about an hour. So it's core development now actually possible to like push a change to your merge request and have the test come back in the time that you might be able to, have a small sword fight rather than actually having to find a whole other issue to work on. So we're really excited about that. But also your contrib projects can use it, and it's really nice for them as well. So if we have a look at comments pause, I moved this to using GitLab CI recently. You get the same stuff, and you get out of the box, you get PHP CS, PHP stand testing, PHP unit, and it all just is pretty nice. And the way you do that, let's just have a look. It's not very difficult. The link is in the what I'm going to call it, in the slideshow. So hopefully you'll be all sent that. But you just add a GitLab CI YAML file, and the magic really is this bit. This includes the templates that are provided by the Drupal Association for running stuff. I've overridden the PHP CS job because I don't like Drupal coders standard rules. I just use cause rules. And I have a special job for doing Drupal 9 testing at the same time as doing Drupal 10 testing. There are a few variables to learn about. You can read all about it in there, about like doing concurrent testing and suppressing deprecations and skipping certain bits because I haven't fixed it for this module. But what's really nice is when you do that, you get PHP stand testing for free. So if we have a look at what that means, I don't know about most people, but not every single contrib module I work on has like full test coverage. And this one I upgraded from Drupal 9 to Drupal 10 recently, and it had code like this there. It had like a call out to render, but actually this code wasn't tested, so all the tests were green. So on Drupal CI, the old system, it was green. It was all looking good, and then I moved it over to GitLab, and I turned on PHP stand testing, and I immediately saw something like this. And what's really cool is it shows us that there's a problem with that bit of code. All comes out. And one of the things that can be hard for people to see is where do I find the code qualities things. So just show people that it's on the MR page. It's down in here in the code quality scans. It's also on the pipeline. So if we have a look at the pipeline, come to the pipeline, you'll see there's a whole code quality thing here. And it also goes into the changes page if it can map up the line number to where it's erroring. But yeah, really, really nice ability to see what's wrong with your code. And PHP stands a wonderful tool for analyzing untested code and telling you that there's a possible problem. Okay.
Cool. So
yeah.
For some time, and again, we will share this PowerPoint, so we do have the links in there. We'll move on to recipes, and then Alex, you can cover, and cover whatever you feel comfortable covering with. And then Jim, feel free to chime in whenever. So
Sure.
I'm not even going to share the PowerPoint because the points are pretty quick. So I'll just kind of listen.
You muted yourself, Pat.
Intro to recipes. What are they and why? Go ahead, Alex, and then Jim. Feel free to chime in.
Sure. So I'm just going to give a quick intro to what they are. So for a long time, Drupal's really struggled with how do we share functionality or a set of configuration, a small set of configuration from one site to another site. How do we share like your calendar feature from one site to another, just the configuration for that, or the steps in order to make it. We've had loads of tools that are really good at building a whole site out. So install profiles, distributions. Back in Drupal 6 days, where like just distributions were really popular, it's Open Atrium and the commerce stuff started off. In Drupal 7, you could get a fully featured Drupal site as a great starting point. But then once you started to use the site 2 years, 3 years down the line, you couldn't really have that functionality, add that functionality to your site. So for example, if you built a really successful blog, and then you wanted to add commerce to it, you could add the commerce module, which would come with a very bare bones configuration, but you couldn't take Commerce Kickstart, which has a much more fully featured configuration, and kind of merge that into your blog. So there's always been a tension in Drupal between like having a really great starting point and delivering small, well-defined bits of functionality. And so we were like, how can we fix this? And one of the things is why aren't modules filling this space? And one of the reasons why modules don't fill this space is because they often get dynamic bits of code and it becomes hard to maintain. So we were like, okay, wouldn't it be great if we had a way to define literally a series of steps that a human could take on a site and apply that to a site and say, yeah, you've now had that recipe baked into your site. So if you wanted to have an image gallery on your site, here are the steps to configure it, but no actual code in those instructions. It's just like install this module, create this view. These are things that if you read the recipe, you literally could just do yourself. But instead of having it something that has to be passed on by word of mouth or just by experience, have something that we can write down in some sort of file. So that's where the recipe initiative, that's what's inspired the recipe initiative. And we've been working now for the last year and a bit, I guess, on making that a reality. And as we heard earlier, some people have used our demo code to build stuff, but yeah, that's where we're at. And I'm going to hand over to Jim to continue, because Jim kindly stepped up to taking a leadership role in the initiative whilst I went and swanned around the Mediterranean. And in fact, from a bit before that was when I got like kind of bogged down with other bits of dollar work and core work. So Jim has really done a great job at taking the initiative on. So let's hear from Jim.
Sure. So I like the space a lot. I signed up after I saw Dries talk about his starter templates. If you remember that from the Dries note at DrupalCon Portland. I'm not a programmer. Half of what Alex just talked about went over my head, but I am a certified site builder. And I like to put together configuration only modules. And one of my favorite modules, SEO Starter, just, required a bunch of modules that, needed to be installed on a site, and configured some of them using config override folder. But the issue I ran into was you could never uninstall any of the modules. Like I don't need coffee anymore because Gin Toolbar has a nice search in it, because of the dependencies of the module. So one great thing that Alex built into recipes is that recipes are applied to Drupal. They are not installed. And that's where the big issue comes in, where, you can bring in all these configurations and it's ephemeral. Like it's poof in the wind. You have done all this work and your boss doesn't need to know that you installed a recipe and did it. You know, we even have somebody who contributed a package for unpacking the dependencies of the recipe to your site's composer.json. So the recipe still have a composer. You can require dependencies from a recipe, but then those are transferred to your sites. So you never need to have the recipe installed in your code base if you don't want to. They're meant to be easy to share and don't lock in the sites, you know, part of the ephemeral process. Just talked about leaving no trace. They're composable from other recipes. So big question I get when I have talked about this before is, what if I need to do this afterwards? What if I need to do this before? So your module, your recipe could require a custom module, you know, that you keep on a package list or, you know, in a public repository. You can combine recipes. So you can, you know, say, yeah, at the end of a recipe, install another recipe, or actually it's vice versa. You can say in your main recipe could require 5 other recipes. So you can just kind of stack and compose recipes as needed. What the initiative is, where we are right now, is Alex has written a ton of code, and there hasn't been a lot of effort into maturing that code until recently. It's been a bunch of site builders and agencies that have been banging on it. So right now there is a lot of work that some agencies have done to put together these big, huge site starter recipes. Think of everything that we do in Sprint Zero. You know, you set up the Drupal site and start clicking around for a week. You know, those are what we're able to knock out right away. But, you know, some issues we run into, like if you have something configured slightly differently than the recipe is expecting, it fails. If you have a module installed or a block installed that you're trying to install, it fails. You know, Jared brought up a really good point in Pittsburgh at DrupalCon about recipeception, where we do require multiple recipes, and the first recipe altered a config that the second recipe wants to then touch. You know, there's some failures. So, you know, it's a really great time to get into making recipes, to seeing what works and what doesn't, to drive the next round of development. So what I've been doing, you know, of course, for our you know, my agencies, we have a big Drupal starter recipe that I've put out there, and now I'm trying to break it into chunks. And I'm also looking for opportunities for things we do over and over again, not just necessarily features like Alex and I talked last week, or maybe it was this week, about a calendar feature. Like, how many times have we written a calendar or made an accordion for a site? You know, those are really cool pieces of functionality. But what about configuring a mail server for a host that doesn't have mail service? You know, which modules do we need to put together? I put a recipe together this morning for configuring ImageMagick as the image toolset. I mean, it's a pretty simple process, right? It's requiring one module, enabling it, and changing 2 configs. But now I have a recipe that does it, and you know, it could take 30 minutes, and maybe instead of an hour and a half. So there's that. I have another simple one for putting in the Gin admin experience, which is the Gin admin theme, setting it as a theme, configuring the Gin toolbar and Gin login modules. So like simple pieces of functionality there. So if you're interested in joining the initiative, it's set up like a project on Drupal.org, like we're like a module project. That way, a lot of the modern initiatives are working this way. They either have a module that they're working on as experimental, or they have, you know, in this instance, it's a whole fork of Drupal core. We iterate on this project, and then once it would be ready to merge, there would just be one giant merge request that would go into Drupal core. So we have our own issue queue. The initiatives can iterate faster in the contrib space than trying to have a core patch that's updated. And one nice thing that Alex did with the CI automation was every time we make a new commit, the patch gets updated that you need for Drupal core. What else? Any questions? since we're kind of at time.
You're muted again, Pat. That's why Pat brought me on to tell him when he's muted.
I turned it up. I went back and turned it up. Yeah, I have a couple questions here listed, but let's get into everyone else. I know we're a little bit over time, so if you have to hop off, you can. I think Friday is a good day because at least sometimes people can stay a little longer. But yeah, let's open up to everyone else with questions for Jim.
So yeah, where do things stand today with the initiative? We could definitely use more developers. We could use a lot more testers, and I like to say it is like Alex made this code and sent it out to the world, and then unplugged for 6 months and left us kids with the code, and we're doing it with what we want. So come and join the party. Do recipes provide obstacles for developers inheriting projects? If so, what are some ways to avoid these obstacles? I don't see that they do. So because they're ephemeral, and as you've applied the recipe to Drupal, you've exported your config into your template, and you've unpacked the modules you need to your composer.json. It's the same thing as if a developer had clicked together all this stuff beforehand. What hasn't been on the roadmap is unapplying a recipe, but may appear as certain stakeholders at large companies would like that. But yeah, at this time, no, it's the same as inheriting other projects. What does the future look like for the initiative, the end goal? So right now there is a roadmap in the code base and probably in 2 or 3 other places. One of the big things on the roadmap that hasn't been worked on is that recipes should apply content also. So the idea of a content entity that could get deployed with a recipe. So like when you make your calendar, how do you know it works if you don't have some example events that come with it? So there's a module in Contrib called default content. That is a really great example. The Umami install profile has a hacky way of doing it also, giving you some actual recipes, no relation. So yeah, that would be the biggest hurdle that we see at this time. But yeah, it would be nice if we could get like initial patch added to Drupal as experimental, but we'll see what the next year brings.
Cool. So, well, yeah, I want to open up to everyone else. Yeah, go ahead, just raise your hand, shoot your question, and come off mute. Actually, stop sharing here. There we go. Okay, so yeah, questions. Anybody have any on any part of the content?
Kaza does.
Oh, Kaza does. Yep, I heard a noise, but I hadn't gone off sharing yet, so I did not see it. There you go.
Yeah.
Kaza, go ahead.
Name's
Or
actually Adam.
Adam,
Yeah. Okay, so just on what we were previously talking about, doesn't Devel have like dummy software or dummy content creation? I know it used to. I don't know if it does anymore, but you might be able to use that.
So Devel does have like the ability to generate. It does have a submodule called Devel Generate, which can generate content. But the idea with demo content is more like you've got a feature and you want to introduce people to it. So like kind of random strings and stuff like that isn't really what we're looking for. It's more like could you like take the Umami content and make that into a recipe which built recipes, and then have it like create one of the recipes, so that when you apply the recipe to your site, company recipes, here we go, you get an example of what a decent recipe would look like. Yes, the Devel module does have the ability to generate content for kind of like load testing and stuff, but it's not something I'd want to put in front of somebody to say, here's my thing looking great. Because it's gonna contain random at best something that looks a weird little bit like lorem ipsum. At worst, it's going to contain like all sorts of odd characters. But yeah, it developed. The default content module is a really good module, and in its latest version, I think it's more and more ready for core, and so we already have the use case for umami, and it's a bigger issue than just for recipes, because the ability for you to have default content means that we could use that as part of your deployments. So, for example, there are some content things that feel more like configuration. So a real good example of that is taxonomy terms. Sometimes on your site, taxonomy terms are controlling like sections and stuff like that. And if you could deploy them and manage them as through default content rather than having to do other stuff, it would be really nice. And if that's part of core rather than something that you'd have to bring in and know about. So it's not, the wishes here are not just really for recipes. It's just we need it in order to kind of satisfy some of the product managers' aims for recipes, which is to be able to give people a great starting place so that they can see how stuff works together.
Yeah. I could see, like, for a university that's spinning up multi-sites from an upstream, having an About Us page that comes with it, or franchises, your local Blockbuster Video that's going to have, certain pages that they need to have the content at least started for, and then they could alter it when it's deployed. So some good real world examples there.
James, I hate to put you on the spot, but could you see this as a use case for you guys?
Probably we've been experimenting with several different approaches to configurations. Right now, we're running about 125 sites off of one custom upstream, and every site's a little bit different. So we don't want to always apply things across the board. If we have a problem with something and we're trying to fix something universally, then we've been doing it we're hosted on Pantheon, so we've been using Terminus and scripting things with Python to change configurations that we would manually have to go in and change, or sometimes we'll manually load a YAML file on an individual site to update the display for a content type. So this could work for a number of situations, but things are so different that it would be a tool that we would use, but not the only tool we would use.
Yeah, we talk about, technically it's the distributions and recipe initiative, as it was kind of born out of the config and distributions realm. And while, nobody agrees this is a replacement for distributions, it's meant to be a tool in the toolkit. There's always going to be some things that distributions need to constantly update, but there are definitely things in your distribution where you just want to say, here's the default settings, go, you're free, do with what you want to them.
Yeah, so basically we kind of solve that problem by when we need to spin up new sites, which isn't a lot these days, because now that we've kind of completed the migration from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9, but we have like a default database. So, we'll spin up a site with a custom upstream, and then we'll load in that database. So as we go along, when we do need to have configurations, we do it there, but that doesn't solve the problem for all the sites that are already in existence. So, recipes would have been great when we tried to roll out the functionality for image widget crop for the WYSIWYGs. There was several different things. We tried the features approach, and that didn't really do all the configurations in the modules that we needed it to do. And it could have been that we just weren't getting it right, or it just wasn't the right approach to use for trying to get that to happen on all the existing sites.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great example. All right, guys. Well, I want to let everyone go. Hey, if you guys like the content, invite someone. I challenge everyone to just invite one person to it. This is actually double the people we had last week, so we are growing. So Yeah, the goal is not to go this long, but we didn't want to shortchange anyone. So Alex and Jim, thank you guys for sharing the content. It was
Sure.
awesome, and I hope everyone enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing everyone on the December edition of Drupal Pupils.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah,
Right.
thank you
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Share
Have a
the
good weekend.
Thanks,
as
Jim.
well.
Thanks, Alex.